going through the fog, going by the old Portland lightship where the skipper we were with tossed a can of beer wrapped in a newspaper up on deck for them. Then he thought better of it and he said he shouldn't have sent the beer. But anyhow, so I've been doing it a long time. I'm now 78. Uh, uh, when my father-in-law passed away, his boat went on the market. And so I was suddenly without a boat. We chartered. Then I decided I would buy a boat, and it had to be a wooden boat for whatever reason. I'm a carpenter by trade, so I guess that's where that came from. Uh, and I didn't know a whole lot about boats or wooden boats, but I had heard of Hinckley, so I went out and bought a Hinckley Sou'wester, which was really a water pump. The stem fitting came down to the keel, and that was the mast step. The mast came down right on that joint. It had a single bolt in it, and it went like this. Uh, so that was my experiences, sailing a little bit, pumping a lot. But I had that boat for 79 to about 96, so almost 20 years. And I just kept wanting to go further and further. And finally, in 1992, I took that boat up on a circumnavigation of Newfoundland. And when I got out to the far side there to come by chance and uh, uh, actually, what's it called? They have the greatest names up there. Seldom come by is where it was on Fogo Island. And the guy came down and stood on the wharf, and it said Boston on the transom. They say, you came all the way from Boston in that? And, uh, he was right. And his implication there was that I shouldn't have been doing it. And he was totally right about that. So anyway, I took that boat back to Rockport, Maine, and had it fixed up a little bit and then sold it and immediately went out looking for something better. And I've been exposed to the Augie Nielsen design and um, construction of the Wallstead Yard in Denmark, and what a pedigree that was. And Tom Kiley, who was doing broker work in Camden at the time, knew I was looking. He found this boat and called me up and said, just buy it. And I looked at it, and he was absolutely right. It was a perfect boat, except that it had a centerboard, which I wasn't too keen on, and it had in-mast furling, which I have I love the way it works, and I love what it does, but it also has uh, quite a bit of weight aloft, which I think made the boat more tender. Although I wasn't thinking about that when I was going to buy it, it just became apparent to me later on. And Walter and I have discussed that a lot. But at any rate, it is one beautiful boat, solidly built. When you're anywhere you're on that boat and you need to reach out a hand and grab something, it's there. It's just Nielsen boats are just hard to find a criticism. We came over time to just refer to it as the magic boat because it got us out of so many uh, little things that were just have been difficult and annoying. And anyway, it's just so I had that boat. It came to me in 1998. And then for 20 years, I sailed that all over the place and sold it in 2018 to the editor of Wooden Boat Magazine. And I'm not doing a very good sales job on it, but if you would like to buy it, it's for sale for about three times what he paid me for.
There's a lot of inflation going around. Um, so, uh, Finley, can you talk to us about what inspired you to go north? Because most people, head south when they have a boat and enjoy the Caribbean life and the rum drinks. What inspired you to go into the cold and search out the icebergs?
Well, curiosity mostly, and I like being on the edges of things. And I like not doing what everybody else does. I'm not a very good racing sailor. I mean, it seems like there are two things that you do. when you get tired of sort of driving up to Penobscot Bay every weekend and driving home again Sunday night, you sort of start thinking about, well, I should race. And if I race, I should go to Bermuda and so forth. I have great respect for you guys that go to Bermuda. That is a tough piece of water to sail to. Uh, what I did was mostly not particularly tough, but it looks very challenging because of the long distances involved and the cold weather and the ice and so forth. But it just was interesting. Uh, the real inspiration was Newbold Smith, who was a longtime CCA member in Chesapeake Bay, and he had a boat called Reindeer, and in 1975 or six, somewhere in that range, he took that boat in the Bermuda race, uh, and then left Bermuda and went straight up to Iceland, crossed to Buda in North Norway, and then on up to Spitsbergen and back down through Denmark Strait, Prince Christian Sund at the south end of Greenland, uh, down along the Labrador and Newfoundland coast, back down along the Nova Scotia coast, and all the way back to the Chesapeake, all in one summer. It took me about 7 years to do all that. But he's a boat driver, and I love the way he wrote that up in a book. I read that book probably 3 times. I don't read any book more than once. Just for some reason that gave me the notion that that's what I would like to do. And you know how things happen that way.
Um, Philly, when I think of a wood boat going to the Arctic, the Bowden comes to mind, where it's a tough old schooner, with very thick hull. And when I think about it in the 21st century, I think of like Skip Novak's steel boats with the, big dog houses where you're fully protected from the elements. And then I look at Elskov, and what was going through your mind taking Elskov north? Was there anything in particular that drew you to that, or is it as simple as you take the boat you have?
It's both. You do take the boat you have, and there are a lot of people up there that are in their boats that they have, but you're right, most of them are aluminum or steel or something. Um, I don't think I mean, I wasn't planning to hit anything when I went up there. And I still don't think it's a good idea to go around ice and bump into it. I think you've got to stay away from it. I never sort of ventured into the ice pack particularly. As soon as we got very close to it, I just said, we're going to have to turn back out and not get into that. Um, yeah, but Skip Novak is a much smarter guy than I am, much more experienced, and obviously has the right boat. And McMillan, McMillan was as crazy as I am, but he also did it enough, and he made that boat very sturdy. And it's, as you know, she's still going, the boat.
Yeah, I think she's up there
Wollscott is
now.
a tough, tough boat. I mean, she 19 tons of a 45-foot boat can be more like 25,000 pounds. I was 38, so uh, that's a big, heavy boat.
Well, as a wood boat owner, it certainly inspires me. Although I don't know how my bright work would do in the Arctic, but I appreciate the idea of it.
Poor Elskoff, she suffered a lot in the bright work department because I left her for 2 winters just tied up to a pontoon in Tromsø in Norway. Uh,
And can I just throw something in
Yeah.
about that? That the boats like um, Bowden and those others were really spending much longer seasons in the Arctic and in the high latitudes, whether north and south, where Elskov was really just up there for the summer, and so she, in many ways, was very adequate for that, and I, I think I just point that out.
No, that is very helpful. It's a very excellent point. So, Finley, you can't do it without crew, and I have some of my crew on the call. But How did you get through the logistics of that?
I'm
Uh,
impressed with the looks of your crew.
can you talk?
Well, the fellow in the lower left there is Paul Bishoyev. He's a CCA member. He's my oldest friend and has been kind enough to trust me and come with me on. And he's a terrific sailor, terrific. Anything that goes wrong, he can fix it. And it's marvelous to have a guy like that along. Others are like the fellow in the orange suit there. He's a nephew of my wife. Uh, and he's just a good company guy. He doesn't have any sailing in his DNA, but it was fun to have him along. Meta there next to him was a Norwegian woman that I found thanks to Nick Newman, who's a CCA friend. She's a Norwegian woman who was in the Tromsø community when we were headed north. So mostly a lot of it was catch as catch can. Going across the Atlantic, Paul, I mentioned, and a young woman who was on the Dartmouth College sailing team, and a fellow who was a cadet at Maine Maritime, and they made a terrific crew for that particular voyage. In Europe, it was mostly family and friends who would come over and sort of, a week or two at a time. Uh, the in that picture on the top, that's a crew that I paid, and Darren Carlucci is the fellow with the light colored shirt there. Walter is a he and Walter are friends. Walter knew about him, and he put me in touch with Darren, and we're still staying together on various activities. Though that particular crew, I that was the cruise we did to west coast of Greenland and Baffin and on down the Labrador coast, about 8 weeks. I paid each of those guys $1,000 to come. I said I wanted a crew that I could give them orders. And I asked if they would be willing to accept that stipend as a way of enabling that to happen, and it worked out very well. The fellow on the right, I guess, he was a cook, and he became also the blogger, and he kept a log on science issues that he discovered. So, it's just basically catch as catch can. The last crew I had when we went up to Hudson Strait uh, in 2013, that was probably the strongest crew I had in terms of sailing ability and seamanship. Um, but so much of it is serendipity.
Was there any concern about the crew handling the elements?
No, the worst one for handling the elements was me. I got cold and I got grumpy and grouchy, and uh, I think for the most part the crew was pretty good. It's a little bit tricky because as you know, when you have 4 or 5 people in a small space, the stupidest little things begin to irritate uh, individuals, and so there was always that little bit of things that would happen after 4 or 5 weeks. But for the most part, I think I was just so grateful that people would come along that I spent a lot of my time apologizing.
That's great. Anything about getting Ilskoff ready for such a journey that you might share with us?
Well, when I first bought her, she didn't have a Dodger. She didn't have a boom gallows. She didn't have um, self-tailing winches. Uh, she was just really a cruising boat. I decided that it would be good to split the four triangle up. So I had Sandy Van Zant down in Noank, who's a sailmaker, help me design the sort of the layout. I mean, I knew what I wanted. I just drew a line, and he said, "Yeah, that'll work." But uh, but then he drew the sail area and the sail plan and so forth, and then I had that cut up, and so that was done. I repowered her. She had an old Westerbeek 4107, and I changed that to a 60 horsepower, uh, which I think in some ways wasn't even enough. We spent so much time motoring, uh, really 50% of the time, I think, if I'm honest about it, maybe even more. And I actually think you asked whether this is the right boat. I I think something like John Boxtos has that Belvedere, which is just a big clumsy cruising fiberglass boat, and he put basically a boxy house on it. But as he went through the Northwest Passage, he could stand inside and look out the windshield, and that was a whole lot more comfortable than a lot of what we ran into. But Elskop's interesting. It has so I got this, a good rugged Dodger. Still, it's sunbrella and canvas. It's not hard. But the helm on Elskop is way forward in the cockpit. It's just the particular design it has. So we were pretty well sheltered. And then we were running on, we had a wind vane self-steer at sea and self-steering, uh,
Okay.
the autopilot kind of set up later. Uh, so we were able to kind of be under the Dodger most of the time when it was cold, wet.
And just to be clear, this conversation just makes me think that it's possible for me to take my boat, further north. So I have a very similar setup except for a split rig, but it gives me hope, which is great to have.
I've been
The
saying to Jesse for a long time, we need to find room to stash skis in the engine room, so we can head north. So I'm all in for this, Jesse. You know that.
There's a lot of videos of guys like that.
um,
What
no,
do
I
you
mean
do about
it's
fuel?
amazing.
Sorry,
Oh,
Jesse.
sorry.
I was
You
just
know,
curious. You said you motored, 50% of the time, just looking at that map, like, not a lot of fuel docks. I'm just curious how much fuel you could carry.
Right. We had 100 gallons, sorry, 60 gallons in tankage under the cockpit sole, and then I would take along another 40 gallons in cans, and just had that on deck. The only time that became at all questionable is that long yellow line coming down from the Nuswak Peninsula in West Greenland there, down to the mid-Labrador coast. And that was 1,000 miles with no wind. So we were really on fumes by the time we got to Nain. We didn't have any electronics particularly when I got the boat. It had a Loran, but and an old Furuno radar, uh, which eventually I replaced the Furuno with another one, and then I put in a second radar when we went up to Hudson Strait because I was worried about the fog up there and the lack of charts and so forth. And I really wanted to be able to navigate with a plotter and the overlay with the radar. So that kind of thing just added over time.
So Finley, that brings us right to the trip. If you want to take us through some of the highlights, I can carry you through the slides and just tell us about what your thoughts were and what your plan was.
Well, transatlantic is transatlantic, and that was the first time I'd done it, and we had a very nice time. One of the highlights was leaving Lunenburg, and for some reason we decided to call up the vessel traffic service at Halifax and just say we're out here and tell your shipping not to run us down. And they said, "Well, where are you headed?" And I said, "We were going to England." "Where's that?" On the other side of the Atlantic. "Oh, that England." Whoa. Well, I hope you boys have a safe trip. And I thought somehow it was pretty cool to have them be surprised at what we were doing. So But basically, that was just a sail across the Atlantic. We had a very nice time and arrived 21 days later. And uh, you guys have probably, some of you have probably done that.
What was your target in terms of where you were going to end up and maybe why?
Well, I had this whole plan that we'd go to across the Atlantic and then up into the Baltic. The next year, we went up the east coast of Sweden, and then 2002, we went up the Norwegian coast. 2003 up to, I was determined to get up to Spitsbergen because that's what Newbold Smith had done. And so we went up there in 2003. It's up and back, and then 2004 decided that I didn't know if I'd ever get the boat back on the North American coast, so just decided to bring it back and uh, went across to Iceland and then on or back down to Labrador. But Spitsbergen is it's an interesting place, you know. Now, when we were up there, I think they were saying they had 40,000 tourists come there every summer, few cruise ships. Now I think that number's up, you know, close to 500,000. It's
Wow.
just, I'm so glad I went to these places when I went because it just, you know, first of all, everybody's going on these adventures. It was fun to think that I was doing something that not very many people did. Uh, uh, but nowadays it seems pretty tame.
Except for how you did it. I mean, I think that's what's so amazing.
Well, it's just, God, look at that country though. It's just so rugged.
Yeah, I look at this and I hate to think of, the cruise ships going up there and think that this is one of the few places left on Earth where you can be alone. I think that's pretty amazing.
Well, you know, what's interesting, I've been too chicken to go to Antarctica, but when you go down there, they really don't let you go even below the Antarctic Circle. You just get a little bit on the peninsula there, but the rest of it's pretty much off limits.
And so then the following year, can you take us through the next portion of the trip?
So then we came back and both spent the winter again in Tromsø, and Varnish was a disaster. But Tom Kiley had told me before we went over there, he said, don't worry about that. Just paint all the varnish, all the bright work with brown latex paint. And then when you come back, you can strip that off and redo the varnish. But the varnish never looked as good as it did when it uh, left Salem back in the original day. But anyway, my idea was to go back across to Nova Scotia and to do it by going north of Iceland rather than going down the Norwegian coast to say Bergen, where you know, the little bump in Norway sticks out, because there's just a series of lows that because of the jet stream and the way the weather sets up in the summertime, just a series of lows that goes straight across the Atlantic, kind of just under Cape Farewell and south of Iceland, and kind of slams into Norway right there in Bergen, to the point where there are vending machines in Bergen that sell umbrellas. Oh, it's just, and you know, it worked out, but I kind of think of that we would be on top of the lows, which would mean we would have generally easterly winds that would be favorable for going from Lofoten across to Iceland. And it worked out. It actually, we ended up motoring most of the way and then had a very nice northerly to sail in.
Was
But
this part of
looking at the pilot charts, it will show you that uh, the prevailing winds tend to be as I described.
Finley, was this part of a grand plan, or every year are you just planning the next part of the adventure?
Well, it was a grand plan, yeah. And it was, although it was loose, you know. When I got to the top of Norway, I know what I was quite going to do, although I was pretty sure I wanted to try to go up to Svalbard and uh, there were enough people talking about it there that, so you're going to Svalbard, aren't you? And I said, oh, yeah, sure. And so that cemented that plan. Uh, and then there was quite a bit of preparation actually in trying to figure out how to get crew for that. I ended up John Harries, who's a CCA guy, and you guys may be familiar with him. He has that um, Attainable Adventure website. Lots of really uh, he thinks about things way more than normal people do, and it's really very helpful. Very useful guy, very uh, kindly made himself available to help me with advice for where to keep the boat and so forth. And he got me a Norwegian guy to come on that Spitsbergen trip who was he was a tough old guy. He wasn't actually he wasn't all that old. He's my age, I guess now, but uh, he was a dog musher, and he had spent a winter up there all by himself in a a little trapper's cabin just because he thought he should do that, and he ended up being a great guy.
Nice.
He ended up making me breakfast one morning. He said, I'm gonna give you some real food." He didn't like it. I would eat cold cereal, and all that bird food. He said, the Norwegians who live in North Norway, they want a lot of grease and things. So he cooked up a whole bunch of beans and hot dogs, and I don't know what he cooked it in, but it was like lard or something. It's just the most greasy, awful thing. Anyway, it was fun to have him.
Yeah, I use his website a lot to go to Newfoundland.
I'm
Um,
sorry.
I used his website, the Morgan's Cloud, to
Oh
get
yeah,
yeah for going to Newfoundland. I found it very helpful.
yeah.
Um, do you want to take us through some of the trip to Norway and Iceland?
Well, that shot of Lofoten Islands, that's just a place not to be missed. It's gorgeous. I actually have a friend who's going to go up there and spend a couple of days on the Hurtigruten, the local ferry cruise ship. And she said, "What should you do?" And I said, "I don't know. Just sit around and look at it. It's beautiful." I don't know. I don't think she's much of a hiker, so but that would be the other thing to do, or to fish. There is a whale fishery in the Lofoten Islands in the summertime, uh, which I forget the quotas now, but they're not hitting anywhere near the quota anymore because it just modern tastes are moving elsewhere, I think. It was interesting to see. And
And
then
then
Iceland have you guys been to Iceland?
no.
That's a special place. It's another just beautiful, interesting. The Mid-Atlantic Rift goes right through it. So the lower left-hand corner over there by the airport is continuing to erupt uh, several times just in the last few months. Um, and that slit, that sort of cut through the rock there, is where that is just a place where it obviates itself uh, just to the north and east of Reykjavik. And that place was actually a sort of a special place for the original Norse who settled there. And they established a kind of this is back in the 11th century, 12th century, I guess. They established a sort of democracy where they would all come and have their, I think, really arguments and dueling, jousting, and all that sort of thing. They were pretty. Democracy was a contact sport, even almost as much as it is now here. Uh, but and one of the wonderful things about Iceland is that they have great faith in their women. Uh, I don't know as I can actually say this, but it always seemed to me that the men keep describing things that the pickles they got themselves into and how the women would always come along and kind of get them out of those jams. To this day, I mean, the political leaders in Iceland now are primarily women and have been for about 15 years. That lower left there is that's uh, oh goodness. Anyway, that's the final community on the Horn Peninsula, Isafjordur, and that's a favorite place now. They've built up quite a marina there since we were there in 2003. And so there's a lot of sort of world adventurers coming through there. And notably the guy that CCA member that wrote up the Viking guide, cruising guide, that's been well received in the last couple of years. He came through there and then went on over to Greenland. We left there and went across Denmark Strait, and we had a terrific sail across on some basically an easterly reach, and whales, unbelievable in there. And I think we were just lucky in that respect. But we had great contests trying to figure out which ones were which. But we think we saw all those five including the big blue whale, which was pretty exciting. So many whales just look black and shiny, so it's a little hard to tell.
Well, it's certainly a sight to behold when they're bigger than your boat. Oh,
And then you run into Greenland, and that's a piece of glacier, freshwater ice. And I don't know if you have the next photo, but that's sea ice with some glacier ice mixed in. Um, And that was so the first sighting we had of East Greenland. I was quite nervous about going to East Greenland because it's completely uncharted. Uh, People like Tillman went over there to climb mountains and so forth, and he ended up having one disaster after another, which he happily wrote about. Uh, but and I didn't want to have those kind of disasters. So, in one way, being kind of we couldn't get more than 35 or 40 miles close to the shore because of the ice. We were there too early. It was third week in July, I guess. Um, so we never got into East Greenland to see some of that country, but it was awfully exciting to approach it because it just felt like the only people who have ever really seen that up to that time were uh, either people like us who were sort of the odd adventurer or the fishing fleets that are out there and the whalers and so forth. And it looked like the Teton Range in Wyoming, just as far as the eye could see, north and south. So very exciting coming across there. And then you get around into West Greenland and Nanortalik, which is the last slide, is in the southwest, kind of a tourist town for Germans and Scandinavians. There are hot springs down there, and it's very close to the so-called East settlement that the Norse had back in the 13th century, I guess, 1400s, um, which was ultimately abandoned. But you can see green grass growing there today and John Deere tractors mowing it and cutting hay and so forth. And then you work your way up the coast and you come to Nuuk, uh, which is the capital and where J.D. Vance has been flying in and out of, and Don Jr. And that is probably, Nuuk is several hundred miles south of Disco Bay. This is Ilulissat, and that is the Ilulissat ice fjord, which dumps out what they say is something like 20% of all the icebergs that you'll see on the Labrador coast and down in Newfoundland in the summertime make their way up and around the north side of upper part of Baffin Bay and then down the east coast of Baffin Island and Labrador, and then they ground out or melt down there. But there are the size of the ice that comes off that glacier is 50 feet high or more, and comes in great chunks which ground out And then when the spring tides come and the full moon and the new moon, it'll float it off and kind of send it off on its way on the current. And that's what it looks like when you get close to it. And everybody who goes up there wants to have a picture of their boat through the arch in the ice, right?
It's the
So we went
postcard.
around and said, we're here. And we went around this big chunk of mountain of ice on the right-hand side there. And I put two guys out in our little rubber dinghy, and they were terrified that this was all going to come down on them. And I think they were probably right to be terrified. And even if it didn't come down on them, it would have set up such a wave that they would have been swamped. But anyway, we put them off on the boat and went around the other side and had them take that picture through the arch and then came and picked them back up again.
That's amazing. So, Finley, can you take us through just sort of the learning experiences here? Like, what were some of the greatest challenges you faced on the trip?
Well, that upper left corner there is an interesting one. That's in uh, what's the name of that town? Anyway, that's on the Baffin shore of Hudson Strait. So the tides there are about 26 feet. And so they don't have wharfs. It doesn't make any sense. So what they'll do is they build, and it's frozen 9 months of the year. So they'll build this sort of dike that goes out. And where we would do is we'd anchor off the town down where that other vessel is. But I needed to get fuel and water. And the way you do that is you wait till it's high tide and you bring the boat in and you tie it up to a rock and you get the hose off the truck and you put in the diesel fuel and you get the hose off another truck and you put in the water. They don't have any pipes up there because everything's frozen so much of the time and it's permafrost otherwise. So they have, for the water situation, they've got a water truck and a honey wagon. And so the waste, every house has two tanks. They have a water tank and they have a sewage tank. And the trucks come and pump each one, depending on which way it is. And we just use the same service. The great thing about up there is that diesel fuel is available because everything runs on diesel. So we didn't have any trouble getting that. I think people in yachts worry a lot about the quality of the fuel, but diesel engines don't work well with lousy fuel no matter where they are. So I never worried about it very much. I mean, the Inuit, they don't want lousy fuel, and they're the most amazing, resourceful people. They can fix anything because everything they have is old and cobbed together and constantly needing repair.
Did you have any breakdowns on the trip?
No. I try to make sure we had everything we needed. I had a spare starter motor, and that was good because I had to put that in. Walter was with me when we lost a regulator, but that was in Maine. But I had a spare regulator and popped that in. But no, we've been very lucky. It's a magic boat.
That is amazing. Really, really amazing. Um, how did you deal with the icebergs? Do you have like a system in place, or is it just radar?
Well, I think I was a little cavalier, to tell you the truth. People with me would worry about it a lot more than I did. Um, you don't want to hit them. The big ones you can see on radar in the fog. The little ones, even something like that little bit of ice would be hard to see in a radar. So in the fog, it's a bit tricky, and at night, it's a bit tricky. Uh, but I don't know, we didn't hit one. I told Jesse earlier when we were talking about this, what to do about this. There was a guy up there. Goes to the point of whether you have ice hardened vessel too. It was one of these where you could pay a guy $45,000, you could get on an 80-foot racing boat. One of those Shea Blythe things, I think, from back in the 90s. Anyway, a guy had one of those in Spitsbergen, and he had his crew of people who paid him a lot to be there, and they were going out of Hornsund in the south of Spitsbergen. There was a bunch of little bits of glacier ice, and they put a basketball-sized hole in the bow of the boat that they had. Fortunately, it was a double hull, so he didn't worry about it very much. He said, or at least he didn't seem to be very worried. He said, "I'll fix it when I get back." But he had hit that. It's not forgiving.
Did you have to carry a gun or a rifle on board for going ashore for polar bears?
Well, you had to have one, and it was a requirement of the permit to go to
Svalbard.
Spitsbergen. You had to have a gun. I'm not a person who uh, hunts or is a sportsman particularly. So I had a guy at the sportsman club in my hometown. Uh, he and I went. He showed me how to shoot the gun that I was going to be getting, and which was just an old 30-06 from the war, I think. But bolt action, simple gun. Uh, and then I rented it from a sporting goods store in Tromsø in Norway and had it. And you had to, when you were ashore in Spitsbergen, they required you to have a way of defending yourself against the bears. Uh, and correspondingly, when you get over to Baffin and Labrador, and particularly in the Torngat Mountains National Park in Labrador, in the north of Labrador, there are polar bears all over the place, but you can't take a gun. Uh, you're, you can have a gun in Baffin because it's not a park, but the guns are not allowed in Canadian national parks.
Interesting.
I don't know. The last thing you want to do, the polar bears live there. That's their home. I mean, I don't think we're the guests. Not a great idea to be shooting at them.
But then you should mention the monitors, up in that camp we were up in the fjord in Labrador. The monitors at that camp.
Oh, yeah.
And we couldn't go for a walk until the monitors came back, and I thought the monitor was a radio or something, but it's a guy with a gun.
That's at the park headquarters in up in the Torngas right at the beginning. They have quite a organized place up there that it's actually grown into a small town at this point. But when we were there, I think it was still tents, Walter, and
Yeah.
yeah, and they had bear monitors who were Inuit guides. They were those guys. I remember that guy Henry. They have what they call rangers, and one of the reasons they established the whole ranger corps, so to speak. These are all Inuit guys who've been trained to sort of know the land and keep an eye on who's coming and going and so forth. And it was actually one of the reasons they started that, I think, was to kind of validate the Canadian sovereignty over that whole archipelago that's north of the mainland of Canada. It's still something of an issue. I remember back in the 60s when they drove the oil tanker, the Manhattan, through there. And the Canadians objected because they said, you never got permission to come into our water. And the United States, not unlike what we're doing today, said that they didn't think that, they thought it was international waters and we have every right to be there. Who knows? That was a crazy trip, actually, that Manhattan through. They said none of that stuff that area is chartered well, and it's quite shallow. And cruise ships have been discovering that to their annoyance.
So, Finley, I can't even imagine the level of fulfillment you must have gotten from completing such a trip through such a remote area of this globe, this world. I mean, is there any advice you would share on, doing something like this or taking advantage of, the opportunity we have in life?
I know. If you want to go, just go. I mean, I don't know whether you saw there's a book review in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about a guy who was talking about he decided during COVID that he needed to have something to do, so he took I forget what he had, some kind of like a 40-foot fiberglass boat, and he decided to take that through the Northwest Passage, and he did it. And he was, he's quite a self-promoter. So he persuaded the National Geographic to put a photographer on his boat and pay for him to be there. So that I never had that kind of gumption.
So, Finley, actually, that was that book, which I haven't actually read, but I did read the review of it, was what inspired the questions about the crew, because he had a fight with this crew, and a lot of the book, I guess, is about whether his other crew member on that trip was going to leave or not. And he went into in great detail, a lot more than most people go into about, the experience on these small boats through very adverse conditions. So that was one of the things that I was asking, why I asked you about the crew component of this, because it is such a challenge for everyone involved, but those that don't have the enthusiasm or maybe a little less aggressive about the trip. So that's why I was curious about that, was because of that book. That is, I look forward to reading that.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of books out there. Not the least of which, if you talk about crews that didn't get along, was a Rockwell Kent book, North by Northeast, Northeast by North. What is it, Walter?
I
I don't want to get
remember.
that wrong.
North by Northeast, I think, something like that.
Yeah, I know that Walter Cronkite wrote a book called North by Northeast or something. Anyway, there isn't a compass point in Walt that is actually accurately described by Walter Cronkite's book, but Rockwell Kent did use the right compass point, and I'm just getting that right. Anyway, that was in 1927. Took a little cutter called Direction up to Greenland, and he and another guy, and they were complete loggerheads. They couldn't get along with each other at all. They finally ran the boat aground and walked away.
Well, I am extremely thankful to have the opportunity to talk to you about all these things, but I would love to open it up to if anyone else has any questions, or wants to talk about anything else that I may not have covered about the trip. Or not. We can end it here, right?
Was keeping warm ever difficult? Was easy enough to generate heat or just keep warm otherwise?
Yeah, it was okay. Um, Once you sort of, the temperature of the water was really the temperature that you were dealing with all the time.
Right.
So unlike down here where, one day it's 30 and the next day it's 70, especially this time of year, up there it was always about 40. And when you got into the sea ice, it was a little colder, and that was uncomfortable. And so if you were, you had pretty much everything that you were wearing, and good sleeping bag at night. And we had a little heat in the cabin, a little diesel heater, and that really took the edge off pretty nicely. And but yeah, I think, I don't think I had enough heat. And then having to be on deck as opposed to in a wheelhouse. I mean, I really think if I were going to come up with the ideal boat, it would be, which is not answering your question, but maybe making another point, uh, would just be a relatively short rig motor sailor that could go well with a quartering breeze or downwind, and a big slow turning diesel with a big prop, and you just go along.
Makes sense.
Finley, I'm curious about night passages in the icebergs. You were talking about ice before, and you kind of got lucky and you couldn't see most of them on the radar. But I mean, when we sail at night, like you really can't see much of anything, particularly if there's big waves going on. So were you
Right.
really just getting lucky, or did you avoid night passages as much as possible? How did you deal with that?
Well, there wasn't that much ice for one thing. So like when we went up the uh, Labrador coast, Walter went up with me one year. There wasn't any ice to speak of going up. There was a little bit. It was early July. And then by the time we're coming back, not much. Um, the last one went up there in 2013. Had a guy with me. One of them was quite nervous about ice, and we were making an overnight passage. There didn't happen to be any, but he was determined to sit up on deck and make sure there wasn't. So he went up and sat in the bow, and that was good. I mean, it's good that he did that. I think as I said earlier, I think I'm a little bit cavalier, but you have to be a little bit cavalier. I mean, this is just going to Bermuda, you have to be a little bit cavalier. I mean, this this kind of stuff is not 100% safe.
I
You
don't tell my wife
mentioned you started to allude to it with the boat thing, but if you were to do it again, what would you change? What were the biggest lessons you learned?
Oh, I probably wouldn't change anything. I just loved that boat. I had to, I was so comfortable on that boat. And it was so much, it just becomes part of you, I think. Um, which doesn't mean that it's the best boat to do it in. I was just saying if I was, again, a good stout motor sailor, somewhere around 50 feet, plenty of room for everybody, and a nice pilot house to be in, to be out of the weather. I think that makes much more sense. The other problem with something like Elskoff up there is the native population. Uh, it just doesn't make any sense to them. The Inuit tribe around in these little aluminum lunds that the little outboard skiff, and they've put little boxes and plywood houses on top of them and everything. But they either that or they have these kind of Adirondack canoes which is a kind of a vernacular that's very popular up there. But a sailboat doesn't make any sense to them. And then, the Newfie part of Labrador and on up that coast, it makes much more sense to have something that looks a little more trawlerish than a CCA rule yacht. Well, you guys have been more than kind to me to just let me garbage on like this. It's just really fun first of all, to meet you all, and then
like
to be able to relive some of this. It's been a long time, actually. The last big trip was 2013, so um, I'm really very grateful for Jesse giving me a chance to relive it a little bit.
thank you so much for sharing. I mean, we really appreciate your time, and it's just so great to hear the stories and learn and and dream. So it really is a lot of fun. Thank you.
Well, you can find me in the book, so
Thank
if
you,
you have
Ken.
any questions or looking to find other people, let me know.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's good. Well, I'll see you this summer.
Thank you, Finn.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Ernie.
Thanks for organizing, Jesse.
But of course, thank you.